Absolutely.
The 6 elected.
I'm sorry, yes, of course, the auditor.
Yes.
Absolutely, 6. And Director Severe, of course, works for the auditor.
I would say the other challenge is we've had 4 police chiefs in the 9 years that we've been working with OIR. And just because something was implemented doesn't mean it stays implemented. There are several recommendations that you're making now that you've made over and over and over again, and every police chief has accepted it and implemented it. However, the outcomes have not stayed, right? And so I would love to have recommendations from Michael and the team about how do we make sure that the reforms that we are paying to achieve, we actually are able to maintain. And I'll give an example just for folks who weren't in our room when we were having this conversation yesterday. We talked about the 21-foot rule, where that used to be a common practice of Portland police officers to say, well, they had to shoot because somebody can, within 21 feet, stab you before you can pull your gun, point it, and actually shoot it. We've dispelled that myth to most Portland police officers. However, there was an officer interviewed as part of this report who actually alluded to the 21-foot rule. And so I'm curious as to how do we ensure, as the people who the buck stops with, that once a police chief has accepted those recommendations, that they stay accepted?
Well,
easy questions.
no, not really, but let me take a stab at it. I really do think that, one, there's this principle, and I used to work for the federal government, so I can say this, but there's this principle with USDOJ, sort of, that departments, bureaus, agencies, policing can be fixed. Like, you can come in, do your work, monitor it for a few years, and then go away. And that, to me, just doesn't work. It's the police agency, police bureau is a living, breathing agency. Today's challenges will not be tomorrow's challenges. Leadership changes. Policies remain on the books, but then they're not enforced. So I do think that one way to do it is to, because you all don't have the access to the information to know what's going on in the way that we would, as auditors or anyone else would, with this assignment, you need to continue, I think you need to continue that work in some regards, so you have somebody looking at the raw information, but then to be engaged, and either if things go off the rails and somebody isn't interviewed, there's a substandard investigation, there's something going on where the 21-foot rule continues to be a vestige within the Bureau, somehow that needs to be addressed either individually or systemically. And somebody needs to continue to engage leadership of the Bureau to make sure that happens.
Yeah, please go ahead.
The report, your latest report shows that a couple of people were shot and killed as an officer was falling, and so it begs the question, at least in my mind, as a non-weapons individual, that if the officer had not been falling, would that loss of life have had happened? And so one is whether, can you tell from your investigation whether or not we are training Portland police officers in hand-to-hand combat, how to fall without actually, shooting your weapon? I mean, what do we do other than the taser, the dogs, and the real weapon with bullets in it?
I think that overall, and this is a generalization, that the training is better than most agencies, most police agencies do. That doesn't mean...
I was going to say, that's not giving me confidence, right?
Perfect, right. Okay. But the thing about the dynamic of what happened in 3 of the cases is remarkable. That in this brief period of time, 3 cases occurred in which officers fell, and when officer falls, that officer is going to feel greater threat and have less options available, right? They can no longer create distance if they're on the ground. They no longer have time, and they no longer have a position of superiority, right? So it was remarkable to us, and I think eventually the Bureau indicated in our discussion that they finally started to recognize that this was an issue. But I think by us highlighting it in service, they're going to really focus on this in March. It's high time.
But, so did this come out of the Portland Review, the Police Review Board?
No.
No. And so when things come out of the Police Review Board, what happens to those?
Not enough. Well, not enough comes out of the review board, and that's our point. You know, more needs to come out, and then it needs to go to the chief for review, and assuming she agrees with the recommendation, somebody in her office needs to ensure that there's implementation. That's really not happening.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, and OIR group will be invited back up later for questions subsequent. So colleagues, you know I have a long-standing policy of not taking public testimony for reports. And the reason I do that is that there is a legislative mandate to a group of people who are supposed to go out and evaluate very specific items on behalf of this council and then return to the council with their findings. And therefore, in my view, it is not the same thing as a public forum unless it's like the conversation and the testimony we took last week on the ordinance associated with this report. That was a question as to whether IP or whether OIR had actually done their work and whether that contract should be extended for the remainder of the term. Now, that being said, today I have been asked to make a very narrow exception to that standard. And I've chosen to make the exception to the standard. I have asked Donna Hayes, who is Quantas Hayes' grandmother, and Alicia Johnson, who is the mother of Terrell Johnson. They had approached me through Dan Himmelman and asked if they could have 3 minutes each to testify. I felt that given that these reports are not only a matter of life and death, but that they specifically reference family members, they provide narratives on their family members, that would be appropriate. So I would like at this time to ask Donna Hayes and Alicia Johnson if they would like to come forward. We would certainly welcome your testimony at this point. We thank you for being here. Good afternoon.
Alicia couldn't make it.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Donna Hayes, and at present I'm representing the Pacific Northwest Family Circle. Okay, my thought is on the contract. It's not so much what they say as their contract. Please think wisely regarding OIR's contract, unless you have a better outside expert. I have discussed with OIR representatives, and my first question was, how many recommendations did Portland Police have done since the first report? They represented their employer well, but I wasn't satisfied. I am satisfied with their report. Their report answered a lot of questions that I was unable to get from the city and its employees. I have started reading the previous report, and this is the very first one I'm on. And the increase in compensation is well rewarded because the present report is written better. All I can think of is only gonna get better written. My worry doesn't come from having them on the taxpayer. My worry is having cops with no form of accountability. I believe the city is not really following through on OIR recommendations, or the IPR for that matter. You may not want to pay the amount, pay it anyway, and ask for something in return, like a more timely report, unless this last report length was your fault. The people of this city needs these reports, because our lives depend on the law enforcement paying attention to these reports. These report, without this paper, the report that I got regarding my grandson actually gave me a whole lot of information that I didn't know, that no one took the time out to give me. I mean, things I just truly didn't understand, and this report gave me some understanding. I think they're of value to the city, and I think it's necessary to keep them. I'm finding that a whole lot of people have read these reports, and we can talk about it, and we can look for certain changes. And I think, like they were saying, you were saying that you all need to get together, the police chief and everybody get together, stand by these recommendations. Our lives depend on these recommendations.
Thank you. Appreciate your being here. Commissioner Frisk.
We have 3 members of the Albino Ministerial Alliance here today, and I would very much like to hear from Dr. Bethel, Dr. Haynes, and Dan Handelman if they are interested in giving testimony as an exception.
So I made this narrow exception for today, and I will accept that, but I want to be very clear. I'm not setting a precedent for the future. But the pastors are partners in our settlement agreement. Their voices matter. They've made the effort to be here today, and I would certainly welcome their testimony, if they so choose. I'm not going to make them testify.
Yeah, I realize that you were prepared, but it's similar, Mr. Handelman, if you'd like to testify, you're so welcome to come forward.
Presiding officer.
Come on up, Dan. That was a request.
To our distinguished mayor and to his outstanding city council, and to my former activist colleague who is now on the council, I thank each of you for this opportunity. I did not come with prepared remarks because I wasn't expecting to speak, but over the last 12 years, from the Park report to the OIR reports, we have seen that process. And I think your questions today are questions that are critically important of not just receiving the report, but reading the report from paper to policy and practice, and then moving it into actually action and maintaining that in policy and practice. In 2006 with the Kendra James case, many of these recommendations that OIR, Albino Minister Alliance, recommended in his investigation, like the officer put himself in front of the car, which gave no ability for him to, in space and time, move, and that shooting to the window to kill Kendra James, are actually going into the car and pulling, trying to pull Kendra James out of the car. But what we've seen over the years, Mayor and Council Commissioners, is that we go through this process, and when there's changes of chiefs of police, we